in Cleveland, and there are other similarities. Both are attorneys, and both cut their political teeth in state government. Tony Celebrezzi is a state senator, George Voinovich as a state representative. Now, in keeping with our alphabetical order, it's time to take a look at the George Voinovich family. And what better way to start than with the obvious question, who is George Voinovich?
Who's George Voinovich?
Maybe I should ask
He's been
Janet.
married to Janet Voinovich for 28 years and the father of 3 wonderful children.
And that's it?
Well, that's the important thing, you see.
Yeah.
I know. No, I know.
And someone that's spent his entire life in politics, serving people for about 25 years in various capacities.
George Victor Voinovich, the George for his dad, the Victor for his grandfather, was born July 15th, 1936 on the east side of Cleveland in a neighborhood called Collinwood. It was a mostly blue-collar area where many Eastern European immigrants like George's grandparents came to settle. George led a typical childhood, growing up in the largely Slovenian neighborhood as the oldest of 6 children. He had a paper route delivering the old Cleveland news and generally behaved as most children do. And like most kids, he spent a fair amount of time pondering just what to do with his life.
For some reason, from as early as I can remember, I always wanted to know what I was going to do and what I was going to be. And up until I think about the 9th or 10th grade, I wanted to be a doctor because I have osteomyelitis, which is a disease in the marrow of the bone. And a doctor saved my life when I was very, very young, and I thought, well, that'd be some way that I could be of service to my fellow man. But I decided that the sciences didn't get along with me very well.
They decided for you.
Yeah, and then I was kind of saying, well, what am I going to do? And I got active in a high school organization called Key Club. It's a Kiwanis-sponsored service organization, and I was the second president of the group and got active in Key Club politics. And then I got to know some Kiwanians, and I always kid him. I said, I met a couple lawyers, and I said, if those guys can be lawyers, I could be a lawyer. You know, and it just
That was the beginning.
hit me and said, you know, and maybe it was on my mind for a long time, but I said, I can be of service to my fellow man and make a contribution and, take care of myself, and I'm going into government. And I just made it my mind. It's hard to believe this, but I made it my mind right then and there. I was going to go to undergraduate school and major in government. I was going to go to law school, and I was going to come back to the neighborhood and practice law and go into politics. And that's exactly what I did.
Guess what?
Okay, let's back up a minute to those days at Collinwood High School when George Voinovich had his mind set on the medical profession. But with his interest in science and medicine waning, George threw himself into school activities. Eugene Woznicki remembers George Voinovich not so much for what he said, but what he did.
After seeing his activities, the fact that he was in a key club, he was in a band, he worked in a bank, he was an athletic manager in sports, he was class president eventually. I one day jokingly told him, I said that, hey George, you're going to be mayor of this town someday. And he laughed about it, but by golly, eventually it came true.
As you might expect, George's parents had a role in all of this. Their involvement in the community, according to Paul Grieve, helped set the stage for George's career in public service.
George's parents both were very interested in community, so that this was part of his background. I mean, they just grew up. All of them grew up this way. George, I think it rubbed off the most on.
Well, I think that you're a product of all of your experiences. And, I mean, if you go back through, just start out from the family that I was brought up in with a mother and father who stressed service to fellow man as a high goal.
So as time marched on, George Voinovich grew farther away from patient care and closer to politics.
I really got interested in politics back at Collinwood High School. And then, well, actually, I made up my mind I was going to go into government then. And then I went down to Ohio University and got very active in student government.
So in 1954, George Voinovich left for Ohio University and a major in government. He paid for his college education by working summers at construction jobs. And at Ohio University, his studies and extracurricular activities pointed toward the political aims that he had in mind. He was elected president of the student body. After graduating from Ohio University, George was accepted at the Ohio State University School of Law, and there again, studies and activities pointed in the same direction. This time, he was elected president of the graduating class. 1962 was a big year for George Voinovich. He passed the Ohio bar, returned to his Collinwood neighborhood, and began his law practice.
My first law office was above the laundromat across the street from the Salvation Army thrift store right at 152nd and Aspinwall. And in fact, when I brought the media to Cleveland well, a couple of months ago, it's now George's pawn shop.
More importantly, in 1962, George met his wife, Janet.
I met Janet way back in the Greater Cleveland Young Republican Club. As a matter of fact, the first time I laid eyes on her, she was, we were both campaigning for a guy named Tom Ireland, who was running for mayor of the city of Cleveland, and she was passing out cookies, and
You were
I
blowing
was
up balloons.
blowing balloons. and I think she thought she was marrying a young lawyer who was really going to make it.
I did.
And she ended up marrying a poor politician.
After the wedding, George and Janet set up housekeeping in an apartment near George's Collinwood law practice. George toiled away as a neighborhood lawyer until one day a call came from the Ohio Attorney General's office. They wanted George to join the staff, and he accepted. Shortly thereafter, George Voinovich's political career began to take shape. In 1966, he was elected to the Ohio House of Representatives. It was a first for George Voinovich, and it certainly was a first for his grandfather.
When I was elected, it was the biggest upset in Ohio because my district was 6-1 Democrat. And my grandfather, who came over here from Yugoslavia, had never, ever voted for a Republican. He said, "George, you're the first Republican I'm voting for." And I said, "Grandpa, if I wasn't Slovenian, I probably wouldn't get elected."
At first, the campaign trail didn't agree with Janet Voinovich.
I remember the early days. We'd go to picnics.
Now don't tell too many stories.
Well, no, well,
Now you got
we go out
lots
and
of
we go out and campaign, you know, and then she'd say, "You didn't even look at me. You didn't even know I was here," you know, because I'm out campaigning, and she was very close to me. But today we'll go to somewhere, and she takes off and I take off, because one of the things is there's a lot of people at a reception, and it's almost impossible for you to meet everybody. And so we kind of just go out, and she meets people and I meet people, and then we bump into each other, you know, halfway through. But
Sometimes we end up shaking hands. Oh, hello, it's you.
In 1971, George was elected Cuyahoga County Auditor. 5 years later, he became a county commissioner. In 1978, George Voinovich turned back to state government, serving as lieutenant governor under Jim Rhodes. His campaign was a genuine family affair.
we all campaign together.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting. In a
Lieutenant
lot of
Governor.
families, politics has a way of pulling families apart. And in our particular case, politics really brought the family together. It was like glue. The kids campaigned with us. In fact, when they were very young, I told them, I said, if I was a farmer,
Oh, yeah.
you'd be out in the field working. I'm a politician, so you're going with me.
After serving 1 year as lieutenant governor, George Voinovich returned to Cleveland to run for mayor. The campaign was going well. The Voinovich home life even better. But as Janet Voinovich would point out, perhaps things were going too well. Unfortunately, Janet's paranoia turned to reality when halfway through the campaign, while walking across the street, young Molly Voinovich was struck and killed by the driver of a van who had run a red light. Now, with just months to go before the election, the family, which the previous summer had campaigned together, was now drawn together, this time to learn how to live without Molly.
You kind of put things in perspective. Your life changes. And anyone that's lost a child knows it's a different world, and you learn to live with it.
Well, you learn to live differently. We try to write a lot of letters to people who lose kids because if you've been there, maybe you can say something that helps. And sometimes I tell them it's almost like you become an amputee because a part of you is missing. You go on living, but obviously your life is altered and you live a little bit differently because you don't feel like you're the whole person that you were before.
In 1979, the people of the city of Cleveland fulfilled the prophecies of George Voinovich's friends and colleagues and elected him mayor of the city of Cleveland. It was the first in a series of successful campaigns for that office. His political career continued to blossom, as did the Voinovich family. These days, George Jr. is practicing law, Betsy is a freelance writer, and Peter is pursuing an acting career in Los Angeles. Well, George and Janet Voinovich campaign well together, but how do they relax together?
It's been a long time. But there's one thing we love to do, and it's completely relaxing. And one of the neat things about it is that you're away from everybody, and that's to get out on Lake Erie and fish. We have a little boat, and George loves to fish for walleye or whatever else is out there. No telephone, no interruptions. You know, just you and me and fishing line. That's a nice way to relax.
Did I read you correctly, Janet? How you relax is George likes to fish, and you like to watch George liking fishing.
Oh, no, I'm not there.
She's a better fisherman than I am.
No, I'm not.
But the truth of the
But I love
matter
to hear
is,
you
when
say
the
it.
perch are biting, somebody say, you can't, you know, you're just, that's
I
kind of
know what you're
sedentary.
gonna say.
You know, I've got one rod down, she's got one. I take the fish off, I put the minnow on, she
he's
gets it
telling
in there, she's out.
In other words, he does all the work.
But she's a great fisherman, and we enjoy doing that
I
together.
haul it in.
Yeah.
You
But
take it
I'll
off.
tell you, we just like being together.
Now, think carefully before you answer this. Now, within that context, did you say, Janet, I'm going to run for governor? Or did you say, Janet, should I run for governor? Or did you say, Janet, should we run for governor?
I think it was the last. Should we run for governor? And I think that we kind of eased into that, just like we eased into getting married.
I'm sorry, I'm a nosy son of a gun. You said you eased into the decision about governor the same way that you eased into marriage. Could you
Yeah,
expand on that just a little
I'm
bit?
glad you asked that, Bob.
Well, it's just like, you know, I think you just, you know, one day you wake up and just say that's
That's how it should be.
the way it should be. Yeah, I mean, it's there, it happens. It's
A gradual awakening.
yeah.
So in both instances, there was not a great deal of discussion necessary.
Oh, there was a lot of discussion.
Which one do you have in mind?
I think he means 28 years ago. There's a lot of discussion. And look how well it turned out.
Well, we have almost a month to think about who will be running our state for the next 4 years. But how do we determine who's right for the job? Voting along strict party lines is becoming less and less popular. In some areas, voting at all has become less popular. A large part of the future of Ohio will rest on the shoulders of the next governor. The choice is ours. On November 6th, don't just vote, make an informed decision. And by the way, to help you with that, on October 21st at 4 p.m., we'll present even more of an in-person look at these two candidates for governor, and we'll follow that with a look at their political postures. That's October 21st, 4 p.m., here on WVIZ. Now I want you to try something. Sit back, relax, close your eyes. Yes, I know you're watching Dimension, but just for a moment, imagine you're sitting on a seashore, watching powerful waves crashing against the rocks. Well, if you're not having much luck visualizing this, don't worry. The Cleveland Museum of Art can help through a new